In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. What France has done to the people of Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and its other ex-colonies is among the most egregious crimes against humanity ever recorded in modern history. They should be brought to justice. Yet, even as their atrocities are brought to light, they are willing to throw many more thousands of people to a premature death to resume their piracy of a whole nation. But the guilt belongs not only to France, but to other nations as well. For instance, in an article written in The Guardian, year 2000 by Martin Kettle, it reveals that President Dwight Eisenhower directly ordered the CIA to eliminate 35-year-old Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. That meant for them to kill Lumumba. Lumumba was the first elected leader of a foreign nation in Africa. Even more, Congo was a member of the United Nations. But none of that mattered because he wanted national self-determination for his nation. Kettle goes on to say that the evidence came from an unpublished 1975 interview with the minute taker Robert Johnson at an August 1960 White House meeting Eisenhower had with his national security advisors on the Congo crisis during the Cold War. And I quote, Johnson vividly recalled the president turning to Allen Dulles, director of the CIA, in the full hearing of all those in attendance, and saying something to the effect that Lumumba should be eliminated, end quote. Lumumba was murdered in 1961. Lumumba was forced from office at gunpoint by a coup d'etat. The man who replaced him was a CIA puppet, Mobutu Sese Seko. He went on to steal everything in sight in Congo. And Western corporations plundered the new nation under his rule for decades. Today, African ex-French colonies have signed cooperation accords under duress and ignorance of the French language. They signed such contracts either because they were threatened with violence or they were led by corrupt puppet leaders. And what followed were elections which were utterly corrupt and rife with violence against voters. The same methods were employed in West Africa as a whole, and now those same puppet leaders clamor for democracy in Niger. They threaten to wage war or invade Niger to make Niger safe for democracy. And we know that is a joke. Nigeria, for instance, has one of the most corrupt political systems in the world. But what exactly is democracy to Niger? And indeed to the whole of Africa under European and U.S. domination and control? I'll tell you what it is. Democracy in Africa means to serve the interests of European, United States, and multinational corporations. The current crisis in Niger revolves around that fact. France controls 14 of its ex-colonies as of 2023. They are now called neo-colonies since after the revolts of the 1950s and 1960s, each ex-colony has established some form of European democracy. But democracy in each French neo-colony is not an expression of the masses of citizens in each colony, but rather is an expression of self-proclaimed French right of first refusal of contracts imposed on the people. So it is, in fact, French economic interests which Africans serve in each colony, not the interest of the people of those countries, or in this case, Niger. That means that the role of Africans in French neo-colonies is that of master and slave. or I should say, white supremacists, and African people. How did Africans get into such a predicament in the first place? The reasons are fundamentally very simple. The French government coerced whole tribes at gunpoint and by assassination to transfer ownership of their land, of their minerals, and their bodies over to French control by contractual obligations. So entrenched has this pattern become in Niger that today the French suffer the delusion that they have an easement in perpetuity over the land of Niger and the whole of its West African neo-colonies. No sane African chief would have signed away the natural rights of Nigerian people in the past, but for French weapons of mass destruction, like the Maxim machine gun in the 19th and 20th centuries, to modern 21st century weapons. Now, France manipulates African democracies to install bureaucratic thieves with insatiable appetites for money, power, and bling-bling. They are put into positions of power to float the economic interest through the French banking system for their masters and to control their people by keeping them dumbed down. The French knew that the people of Niger and other colonies were and are vulnerable. Vulnerable because they could not fight back. That is exactly what the French like. They like to attack vulnerable peoples because the French lust for their wealth. They have always been and are today nothing more than pirates. They specifically knew why they were in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. It was not to uplift people, please. In fact, it served the French purpose to not educate them in the sciences and engineering, nor to build infrastructure. Their intention was to stunt Niger's social and economic growth from the beginning, just as is the case in Haiti, in the Americas. The purpose was to dominate, control, exploit, and profit off Niger's resources. They achieved that purpose by forcing puppet leaders to send at least 50% of Niger's reserve currency to the French central bank. That left Niger with maybe 35% cash flow to operate their nation. They were then forced to borrow money from France, the International Monetary Fund, controlled by the United States, or the World Bank at high interest rates. That made it impossible for Niger and other neo-colonies to ever come out of dirt poverty due to increasing debt because of interest. Reasonable people would agree that the French government is white supremacist at its core, that the French government is evil by all reasonable standards, and that the French people relish in it as they relish a hot croissant. They had and do not have any respect for the people of any of their 14 neo-colonial possessions. It is antithetical to their core white supremacist orientation to respect any person or people of color. Any individual who would not comply with French contractual terms was assassinated. We know a few. The French government has assassinated over 22 leaders of Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Senegal, dating back to even before the revolts for independence in the 1950s and 60s. The terms of all contracts in each colony included indefinite military service to France for all males. Men could not refuse military service. Africans would therefore have to fight in French wars in Europe and French Indochina or Vietnam until they were booted out by the Vietnamese people. They taxed the colonial people even though they were not citizens. The question is now, are there legal avenues which Niger can take to remedy centuries of human rights violations? After World War II, leading Nazis were put on trial at Nuremberg, Germany, for crimes against humanity. We know what they did. We know they were white supremacists. We know they were extremely cruel. France has caused the pain, suffering, and death of many millions of Africans, far more than the Nazi Germany murdered Jews. France must be sued. They must be sued for having committed crimes against humanity. Every contract signed by a leader of Niger with a European nation, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, or other foreign nations should be rejected because such contracts or accords are void or voidable agreements. There is no contract when you sign with a gun to your head. Contracts signed during the colonial and neo-colonial period, and even up to this year, should be torn up and replaced with new contracts. New contracts must put both nations on an equal level on the square. Today, neo-colonies of France should sue the French government for damages at the International Court of The Hague under void or voidable contract law, as well as whatever French statutes exist for crimes against humanity under the United Nations Charter. Let the world witness their house of horrors. Let the world see the contracts. Let the world see the destruction of human nature in Niger. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.